Hi W+9 fans, my name is Jaycee Gaspar and I'm so excited to be over on the W+9 channel sharing 3 cards I made using the Christmas Rose Bouquet stamp and die set. Before I get into how I made these cards, let me first show you this wonderful 4x6 stamp set and accompanying dies. The coordinating die set cuts out all 5 of these wonderfully illustrated images. The largest image fits on a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 piece of cardstock, and this image is what I'll be using on my first card project. For my first card, I am solely using the largest cluster of flowers and leaves. What I was envisioning was a cluster that frames a sentiment without any masking techniques. This card is made to look complicated but very easy to replicate for your own holiday card stash. The first thing I did was place an A2 sized piece of vellum in my original Misty. I treated this panel in an anti-static powder to prep the surface for heat embossing. I am using Versamark clear embossing ink and gold embossing powder to create a cluster that falls off the edges of my vellum panel. I heat set all the images using a heat tool, keeping in mind as I am arranging these images to leave a space large enough to frame a sentiment. A tip for you all is to heat the back of your vellum in short bursts and to keep the heat tool moving to avoid warping your vellum too much. Once I am happy with the arrangement, I'll set this vellum piece aside and work on other elements of this card. Here I have W+9 oatmeal cardstock already adhered to my note card base. The oatmeal cardstock from W+9 is slightly heavier than Nina Solar White 80 pound and is a warm off-white with black and brown speckles. I highly recommend it for backgrounds as it does a lot of the work for you. I also have 4 pieces of white card fronts for die cutting. With these 4 pieces of white cardstock, I am going to cut 4 white rectangular frames and stack them for a dimensional look to this card. It doesn't have to be the stitched rectangle variety, but this is all I have. Once I have those glued and stacked, I'll move back over to the vellum piece from earlier. I wanted to add a very subtle color to this vellum piece, so I'm going to turn this vellum panel over and color on the reverse side with some Copic markers. You should not let your Copic marker nibs touch heat embossing as you'll ruin the nibs. So you'll see I am not doing anything special with the coloring. I am adding slight depth and going for a loose, almost watercolor look to this panel. I'll turn the piece back over, embossing side up, just to show you the color contrast on top of the oatmeal cardstock. Once I am happy with the coloring, I'll plan the placement of the sentiment. I am opting for this very tiny holiday sentiment and I will white heat emboss this on my panel. In order to make this stand out a bit more, I will color on the reverse side of the vellum again with a warm gray Copic marker. Now here comes the assembly of all the card elements. I trimmed the vellum panel slightly to 4 by 5 1/4. I will center and adhere those stacked white frames to the reverse side of the vellum panel. I prefer using a matte liquid glue so that it does not show up on vellum. Then I will adhere the vellum and frame to the center of the oatmeal cardstock note card base. The white stacked rectangles give me some height to the card and beautifully frame the sentiment. And that finishes this first card using only the largest floral cluster. Okay, for the second card project, I am solely using the smaller images, so the 2 leaves, branch, and single flower images. I was going for a floral cluster to, again, frame a sentiment strip. I also love non-traditional holiday palettes, so I found this one online with a cold gray, blue-green, and copper mix. I first stamped a full panel of images with a Copic marker friendly black ink on Copic marker friendly paper. Then, using markers that coordinate with the color palette I mentioned earlier, I began coloring the flowers and leaves. I like to do a flicking motion with alcohol markers using the brush nib. It's just my preferred way of coloring floral elements. Once I finish coloring all the images, I will use the coordinating dies to cut out all these images. Now, I can obsess over the placement of elements on my card for quite a while, so I'll just describe what I'm looking for in this clustered yet fragmented grouping of floral elements. I am looking for a triangular cluster of flowers and leaves, and once I've laid out a single cluster of flowers and leaves, Then overall, the clusters on my card front should also form a triangle. Sometimes in order to get a healthy triangular shape, I further trim down the die cuts to create new leaf clusters. So I am cutting off the end of the eucalyptus branch to form two different branch ends. Finally, I have finished arranging the die cut images. I will use Glad Press and Seal to pick everyone up at once, set it aside, and prep my white background. Oh, and this panel is cut to 3 3/4 by 5. I will add a generous coating of black splatters using black watercolor ink and a water brush. This might look like way too many splatters, but 1, there is no such thing, and 2, most of these splatters will be covered up by the flowers anyway. Once that's dry, I'll foam mount it to the center of my side folding note card base. I'll bring back the floral die cuts and flip it over to expose the backs. I'll add the same liquid glue from earlier and add glue to some of the leaves and flowers. I will add foam squares to the flowers I want in the foreground of the card. Now, I love splatters, so I couldn't resist adding more to the tops of the flowers and leaves. All this card needs now is a sentiment. I added a sentiment strip underneath one of the floral clusters, stamped on a scrap piece of gray cardstock. Once I've got that on my card straight, that finishes the second card using only the smaller images included in this set. Now, here's my favorite thing to do with floral cluster stamp sets. With this third card, I'll use both the smaller images and the larger cluster and make my own arrangement. Just as the previous card, I will stamp all the images with Copic-friendly black ink on Copic-friendly paper. I will color certain images with Copic markers. The reason I don't color all the images is because I will be fussy cutting only certain elements to this cluster. Some of these flowers and leaves overlap one another, so what I am trying to do is create the illusion that all of these images are supposed to be arranged this way in the first place. This is just a method of stretching out your well-loved W+9 floral sets. So I am using a swivel knife to cut out the images I colored. If you're more comfortable using a small detail scissor, by all means use what you know best. Just like the previous card, I'll spend a lot of time arranging the flowers and leaves. Again, I am looking for a triangular arrangement to these flowers, and once I have that, I'll use Press and Seal again to pick everyone up at the same time and set it aside to prep the background. I'm using W+9 oatmeal cardstock again and adding black splatters. I also added a die-cut fine rectangle frame to the card front and centered it. I think adding this rectangle will balance out the oddly shaped leaves and hard edges in the floral arrangement. Before adding glue to the leaves and flowers, I added my holiday sentiment within the rectangle. I adhered the floral elements to the card front using the same method as the previous card. I foam mounted the purple flower for some dimension as well. I'm telling you, I just can't resist splatters. I guess I'm not a sequin embellishment kind of guy. I added white splatters to the flowers to create a dreamy aura. And that finishes the final card using W+9 Christmas Rose Bouquet stamp and die set. Hey, thank you all so much for sticking around to the end of this video. If you liked this 3 ways guest feature using Christmas Rose Bouquet stamp and die set, make sure you like this video, share it with your W+9 friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. My name is Jaycee, and you can find me on Insta, my own blog and channel. Special thank you to the W+9 team for sending the stamp set and cardstock my way, and I'll talk to you all very soon.